says draw.io is now diagrams.net. So how about them apples? It still looks like draw.io to me. Okay. Now, can a character become an enemy? Can't you fight each other? Isn't it why a character? Can it be a both? Can't we make this class both for a human and an NPC? Because sometimes they interchange. And so we could put everything as a character. All the same stats are pretty much there anyway. That way it can have possessions, just like a character can have possessions. Um, I think we can just unify this. And that way we can have a helper object between this, a character and a map, meaning a position. And so we can find your position on the map and keep that located. And we can timestamp it. So that way we could get your position in last session versus this session. And so it can be a session-based issue as well. So if that's going to be the case, where your session and your will control how your log is shared with other users, and it also controls what items you gained during that session and your position on the map that session. We might want to start thinking of the session more prominently, meaning position it here between everything, and so have session stand between the user um, and a character and all the rest of items and map positions, and so we might want to start um, considering how we're arranging these items, and that'll help us describe the relationship and how we should consider each thing as we start to program out the views. Remember, you can go to change history and undo all of this in the document, and you can also go and view the info somewhere here. Nope, wrong button, wrong button. Um, there's an info somewhere here. A way to get to this document, this thing here, and when you can see the activity of when a folder was last used, and you can roll it back. You're probably going to want active booleans, an active property, which is a boolean, so that way you can delete things without deleting them all the way off of your database. Sometimes it's nice to have like a trash or just keeping a record of things that throughout the usage of your app, and even if the user thinks that it's deleted, it's still just deactivated data. Surprised how often people beg you to recover information that they've mistakenly deleted. You can also have booleans for archiving things as well, and so we can have tiered level of access. We're going to need to decide early on how we'll be identifying the character foreign key. Campaign map. Do you have character linked to any of these things? Campaign membership. Okay. Yeah, we need a lot of work with the helper items. Identifying those is a big deal, and so we'll get. Yeah, I don't see any foreign keys listed. So every link that you have needs to be facilitated by foreign keys to say which the ID of which character is a part of which map. So so in order to, we need to validate, we need to figure out the mechanics of each of these lines connecting things, and we'll find out that in order to connect an item to a character, then a possession helper object in between describes your ownership, when it happened, if it's still in order, what sort of boosts to your character are now in play because of this possession. And so this will be able to qualify the nature of your possession. I'm going to write down the item ID and the character ID. That's forming the fusing of these. That's how you facilitate a many-to-many relationship, because you can't. We could just write a single item ID in a character. That means there's only one spot for it, and you want to be able to hold more things, and so you can do that. We can even maybe list like if this is within a certain bag, um, and so we can reference it yet another item that it indicates that it's part of that possession. So that way, if you take a single bag, you'll find all of these other items within that linked foreign key. So um, anyway, it could be all sorts of complex relationships we're building here, and this is just in item. Similar with our concern about how we're going to note. Do we write character or do we write car? It's because you're constantly going to have to check back on this map to figure out what is the property's name. And so if you keep it standard throughout all of your items, it's going to be much less frustrating on when you have to look up what's the name of that property. So if sometimes when you're referring back to a character, you're calling it, oh, it's the carrier of the item, or it's the author of the log, if it's constantly changing, it's going to drive you crazy. So it's always best to just refer back as the reference to the name of the thing. So the character that is writing the log. And I think we might want to refer to it as the character, and this is the user. Because if you take over another person's character, then you would then write new log entries under that character. And so I think we want to note both the user and the character simultaneous set of authors. The button you were looking for is over here. That toggles this side thing. Now we can link an ownership of an item. I think ownership is easier than possession because there's too many S's in possession and it's confusing. But if we note the session when an ownership happened, you can persist owning an item through multiple game sessions. So we'd have to include a docstring comment just saying that this is the initial session in which the ownership began, which would also align with the created on date. But it would be frustrating to have to look up what ownerships were created on that correspond with the session's date. That's too much. We can just say on that. And so that way we can have a dynamic record saying in this game session, these items were collected by people, by these characters. And you can like hover over it. So you could do easier reporting on what happened in that game session. So anyway, that would be a bonus. This association object that links things will also need an additional foreign key, and that's how it facilitates. That's how I know what session this ownership is connected to, because I'm going to stamp its ID there, its primary key. I'll link here, and so that's why this is a foreign key. So that's how I always list these foreign keys first. So item doesn't need any foreign key because that's the whole point of this ownership objects. It connects the item ID number with the character ID number, and so it won't have any unless we start making other types of relationships, and it'll have any here that it has a single relationship to, and that's how I'll write this. An ownership is a unique relationship between a single character and a single item. But if you change owners, then you'd create a new association object, a new ownership between a character and that one. And then we'd mark the previous one as ended on. We'd give a date time stamp, and we'd active false. Necessarily active false. Active because the ownership could still be uh, an active record, but because ended on, that we can say doesn't own, and so we can make a property that'll automatically say if this is true, then if that exists, the data, then you don't currently own it. And so we can note that just by, if it has a date time here, then we know you don't currently own it anymore. And we don't necessarily have to change active to false. Reinforce the idea of this association object. You couldn't have a campaign have characters because because a character can be in more than one campaign. You wouldn't want to write down the ID of every campaign. Instead, you'd have a row in your Excel database called SQL that can say what campaign ID it has and what character ID it has. We'll even link the user. I mean, we might not need to. We could just do campaign membership.character.user in order to just hop the user from that step. But we can always start with a foreign key and then just see if we need it, because that way we would have sessions. We would have an additional thing here called memberships, and so that would note every time you've brought a character to a campaign. Goes similar question for position on a map, because do we note if we have the campaign will have a designated map ID. So you'll just have one world map for your campaign. But I suppose you might want additional maps for smaller encounters, for dungeons and levels. So you might actually have that unique for each session. So this would have the map ID. So one session per map. And then if you went to a different map, you'd have to start a new session. Yeah. But so now I'm struggling about how to link a session to many different characters that are playing it. Assume that a session, if I say your characters, it's just all of the characters that have memberships to that campaign. That doesn't allow you to have, like, how do I note if certain players aren't with each other at that time? We're going to, creating all of these objects, it's going to be tedious manually creating these things in the Flask admin and database manager tool. So we're going to need to make sure we think of views and a workflow that automatically builds most of the stuff in the background, so we never have to manage all of these association objects. We can just clearly say, oh, I wasn't with this person, I was with this person, and all of the little things get automatically built. I thought if we didn't have a user ID listed on the character, then it would be an NPC. And so we just, if this is blank, then the isNPC function would return true. So what if there was an attend object that linked a membership to a session? From the membership, I'd be able to see what character and what user it was and what campaign it is. We could make a campaign thing directly anyway. But I could also then note a group number. And so if you're in a different group number then in that session, then you can't see the other members of the group. And so your log would then be hidden. So during a log, every particular log would have to, since it's that day's session, then we could note the session, the attend ID, and that would note, and then from there we could see if that is in the same group as the other members of the campaign, then you would be able to see each other. To the world of database architecture.